Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist. And this is a topic that comes up over and over again in my therapy room. And it's this idea of losing control of your eating at the end of the day. People will say, I feel like I could be really good during the day. I'm in control, everything's fine. And then the evenings come and I just lose control. And I don't understand why. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 5 reasons why it could be that you're struggling with out of control eating at the end of the day and what you might be able to do about it. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you might even guess what number 1 is going to be. And it is the one that people have the most resistance to. So if you hear me talk about number 1 and you're still thinking that is not me, there are 4 more reasons that are not about this. But the first one that we have to consider is, are you eating enough during the day? Now, people are resistant to this being the reason for 2 reasons. And they are, number 1, first of all, they are convinced that they are eating enough. They really believe they're eating enough. And if you think that this is you, this is the question that I sometimes ask. And this is just a broad bracket, but it's a starting point to think about this. Before 3 p.m, are you eating more than 40% of your entire daily intake of food? If you are not, you may benefit from trying to eat more during the day. Which brings me to the next reason why people are very resistant to this idea, because if this is true, the solution is eating more during the day. Now, certainly for me, I didn't want to eat more during the day. I was somebody who struggled with compulsive eating, so I need to make the most of when my appetite is lower, because at some point my appetite's going to swing into out of control. So the thought of eating more food than I necessarily wanted to in that moment or felt like I had to in that moment, no, thank you. I was so stubborn. I was so stubborn about what I thought was true. But the reality was that when I did start eating more during the day, when I did start eating when I was not hungry by getting out ahead of hunger, because what happens is when people go, well, I don't feel hungry, they get to the evening, they have a meal, and it's a substantial meal maybe, and they feel full up, and I don't understand why I want to keep eating. I'm not hungry. But your brain is looking at how much you've consumed over the whole day, and actually over the last few weeks and months too. And it wants to make up for any perceived deficit. So therefore you can feel full up of food and still be hungry. And then of course your brain is going to kind of draw you to the higher calorie foods, because if you've just had a big meal, chances are you're not going to be able to just eat that same big meal a day. So the brain's smart. It's like, we want more energy, and we know that these types of foods have more energy, take up less space in the stomach. You know, let's go for the sweet stuff. Let's go for this. Let's go for that. The other reason why eating more earlier in the day can be really helpful if you're someone who's pretty dysregulated in your eating is because ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone that's produced in the stomach, has a circadian daily cycle that looks very similar in you and me. And ghrelin starts off lowest in the morning, which is why most of us do not wake up feeling hungry. And it goes on this gradual incline through the day. And then around 7 p.m. we get a spike of ghrelin. We all get this. And the theory goes that it's an evolutionary thing that is prompting us to eat before we go into a fasted state in sleep. Now the trouble is, when you are trying to eat as little as possible during the day, you're only eating smaller amounts, your ghrelin levels rise quicker throughout the day than they would otherwise. And you still get a spike, but now your spike is going even higher. So there is a natural circadian hormonal cycle that drives us to eat a bit more in the evenings. And we make it worse by eating less in the day. On to reason number 2. And this is decision fatigue. How many times have you come home, you're tired, you just want to be able to curl up and eat some food, and you don't have anything prepared, and you have to think about, okay, what am I going to do? I need to cook this, or I need to pop to the shops on the way home. What shall I have for dinner tonight? The problem is we have a very specific part of our brain that is involved in decision making, and we have to use it a lot. So there is a well-documented and researched phenomena called decision fatigue, which means that part of our brain gets exhausted and making decisions later on in the day is harder. So if you are always waiting until the evening to try to figure out what you're going to have for dinner, what you're going to eat, then you're setting yourself up for your brain just going like, I'm too tired. I don't want to think about all the different things involved in preparing a meal. Let's just order takeaway. Let's just have this. Let's just have that. And I want to stress, there's nothing wrong with ordering takeaway. I'm talking about if you feel like this is something that is compulsive. I also think that many of us, me included, we don't do the best job of predicting how we're going to feel later. So we imagine that evening us is going to be as motivated and as energetic as morning us. So we think, that's okay, we'll figure it out later on, we'll cook a meal when we get in, we'll do this when we'll do that. But we're not predicting how we're going to feel at the end of the day. So if you recognize yourself as potentially struggling with decision fatigue, the way to manage this is to make some decisions in advance. If you know that spending time preparing food at the end of the day is something that you struggle to do, then ask yourself, how do I make this easier? Are there things that I could have ready earlier? Can I reduce the number of decisions that I need to make around food throughout the day so that I have more brain power to make decisions that really feel like choices? And reason number 3, picture this, you are somebody who you are just firefighting all day. Maybe you have got household chores, looking after kids, work, everyone's making demands on you, you're caring for this person, caring for that, you're trying to keep everybody happy, you are putting out all day long. And then evening time comes, maybe the kids are in bed, maybe most of the stuff is done for the day, whatever it might be, and you're like, now I need something for me. So this is the idea of using food as a reward. Like you need something to reward yourself for all the stress, all the strife that is going on in your life at the moment. Anna Lemke, in her book Dopamine Nation, she talks about like pain and pleasure in the reward system being like this seesaw. So you press down on one and the brain wants to recalibrate and come back to balance. So this can be a way, maybe even neurologically, of trying to balance our reward system. You might think, I just shouldn't need a reward, but your brain is saying something else. Now, ideally, the solution to this is to look at your life more broadly and go, okay, how do I make myself something of a priority? How am I speaking to myself that's causing more pain, making me feel more exhausted and stressed, that I need the food in order to soothe? And I also want to say that food is just the quickest, most convenient way for many of us to get a reward hit. Because eating is inherently rewarding. We have particular kinds of food that are designed to be extra rewarding. And it's instant, it takes little effort, it's there and it's available. And so when you don't have time and you're exhausted, of course, food seems like a very attractive option. Now, I appreciate not everyone is able to just, I'm just going to change my life and make my whole life more rewarding. I appreciate it's not as simple as that. There's a lot more nuance to this subject of reward, and even the awareness of it can really help to manage it so that you can still get some kind of reward around food without it turning into a compulsive, out of control thing. I have 2 conversations on YouTube about this subject where I go into it in more depth. I'll link to them below. They're both conversations with Stephanie. One is about using food as a reward, and the other is a book review of the book Dopamine Nation. So if you recognize yourself as somebody who's using food as a reward, you might want to check out those 2 videos because it will give you a better overview of what might be going on. And reason number 4 is the idea of transitionary eating. Now, this is one that doesn't get spoken about as much, but we go through our lives and we have to transition in different modes, from one mode to another. We have different ways that we operate, different patterns depending on our situation. So how you are with your family is going to be different to how you are with the postman, hopefully, or how you show up at work, or who you are when you're doing chores. We have these ways that we have to transition. So one of the common ones is transitioning from work mode into non-work mode. And from a brain perspective, it's like we're on one track and we have to lift ourselves off and put ourselves onto another track. It's a little bit like, I've never related to this personally, but people will say sometimes that when they go on holiday, it takes them like 3 or 4 days to get into the holiday mode to be able to change tracks. This is also tied in with something called monotropism, which is this idea, if you're somebody, particularly those on the autism spectrum or who have ADHD, they can become very fixated on their interests or what they're focused on. So it can feel almost mentally painful to switch onto another track. And food becomes this transitionary object, whereby, because food kind of shifts our biology a little bit, you eat something, right? Let's say you finish work and you have a couple of biscuits, or cookies for my non-British followers. You have a couple of biscuits, and so that there are biological changes that go on in your body when you do that. Your blood sugar starts to go up, your body will produce insulin. There's a chemical change which just may make transitions easier. One of mine was, if I had been socializing with people and then suddenly I'm on my own, and I go from this social, energized Sarah to like no stimulation, nothing. That switch, it doesn't, even as I'm saying it, I find it hard to describe it in a very rational way. Felt almost painful, and it was a really common trigger for me to then go and binge, and I couldn't really understand why. But thinking about it from a transitionary perspective, it was like, oh, okay, this makes a bit of sense. When it started to make sense, when it happened, I could go, oh yes, I am experiencing like a strange sort of emotional pain that seems to happen when I am transitioning from social mode into alone mode. Because it wasn't that being alone was painful, it was the transition that was uncomfortable. And to handle this, what really helped me was the awareness of that. So I could name it, as opposed to this just uncomfortable feeling that showed itself in a desire to eat. And for some people, it's about feeling that discomfort of the transition and allowing it to be. Because emotional experiences are more painful and much harder to bear when we don't understand them. When we understand them, like, the brain can calm down a bit and we can just tolerate the discomfort a little bit easier. And then the last reason is simply, like, this is a simple one. It always sounds simpler than it is, but it's habit. We experience food cues, as in CUES, nudges and prompts to eat. This is a primal programming. And we're also creatures that are capable of building habits, where we can go on autopilot in certain situations. So the combination of this primal tendency to be cued to eat food alongside the capacity to build habit and go on autopilot is a perfect combination for having that experience whereby you just feel like you have to eat because it's what you do. And so then to not eat or overeat in the evenings feels uncomfortable. It feels like this gaping hole. Now, let's say you were a smoker and you wanted to stop smoking, and you have a cigarette every day at 4 p.m. That's one of your patterns. It is going to come to 4 p.m. and you're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel like something is missing. Now, ideally, what you want is to go, well, at 4 p.m. it's not just a case of I'm not going to do this thing. It's a case of I'm going to do something else instead. People try to change their habits by saying, I'm just going to stop doing this thing. And I'm a big fan of habit disruption. So if there is a really strong pattern to, okay, you have dinner and then you want this thing and it looks like this and it looks like that, is to try to mix it up, like creating bigger gaps. Let's say you normally have dinner and then the overeating starts. Giving yourself half an hour, sitting somewhere else when you eat. I'm always careful about how I talk about this stuff, because if I talk about it as habit and habit disruption, it sounds like I'm saying, some people will hear it this way anyways, oh, these are the things you need to do to eat less. There is nothing wrong with having habitual patterns around food. It's probably necessary to free up mental space. If you feel like, however, that your habit is very compulsive and that you really are eating a large amount of food, look at the first 4 first, because I think people are very quick to go, oh, it's just habit. And habit is absolutely going to be a part of it, probably for pretty much everyone. But I think it's quite rare or less likely that it's only habit, but there will be some people for whom that is the case. And there is plenty of stuff out there about breaking habits, building new habits, making small changes, shifting this, changing this a bit. And I don't think it's an area that's wise for me to go into in any great detail, because I think people will hear it and try to apply it in a way that actually may end up being a backlash, especially if you're somebody who has quite deep-rooted or long-standing struggles with food. So anyway, those were the top 5 that came up for me when I was thinking about this. There are probably others, so if there are other reasons that you can think of, pop them in the chat below. always interested in expanding the conversation, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.